Hello, everybody, and welcome to this SC400 course in our day number 3. My name is Andres Ibarra, and it's gonna be such a pleasure to be here with you guys. So, this is our day number 3, and well, let's summarize some of the topics that we already covered during these couple of previous days. So, as you can remember, in the day number 1, we work with the module related with implementing information protection in Microsoft Pureview. So we didn't cover all the topics of this module. We separate some of the module 1 topics in the day 1 and other ones in the day 2. But the first topics that we cover in this day number 1 were the introduction to information protection in Microsoft Pureview. Also, we talk and discover some ways to classify the data for protection and also for governance purposes. Then we move to the last topic that we covered that day related with protect information in Microsoft Pureview. In our second day, we continue finishing the content of this module number 1. So these topics were related with describing Microsoft 365 encryption and how to create and manage sensitive information types. Those topics were related with the first day. So also we have some additional topics that we cover in the second day. Those are related with deploying message encryption in Office 365 and how to configure sensitivity labels. Once that we configure the sensitivity labels, well, we discover in a general way how to apply and manage the sensitivity labels. So in this day number 3, guys, we're going to move and talk about this module 2. It's a completely new module that is related with implementing data loss prevention. So remember, each module we're gonna have several lessons, and in each lesson we're gonna discover the specific objectives. So our first lesson of today is gonna be the prevention of data loss with Microsoft Pureview. Then, once that we know the basics of Microsoft Pureview, we can start implementing this data loss prevention with our endpoints. We're going to continue talking with the how to configure data loss prevention policies for Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps and Power Platform. And our last lesson for today is going to be related with managing data loss prevention policies and reports in Microsoft Pureview. So with that in mind, before we continue with our topics, well, let me share with you that we are going to work in 2 different parts during this session. So this first part, it's going to be related with theory. So we're going to cover all the topics in this part. Then we're going to have a 30 minutes break. You can use these 30 minutes as a lunch break, as a coffee break, or maybe you want to stretch a little bit. So yes, we are going to have this theory part, this small break, and then we're going to move to a second part of the session that is going to be related with the lab environment. In the lab environment, we are going to cover new lab activities. So some of them that we already saw were the assigning permissions for compliance purposes. We saw how to also, in previous days, we saw how to set up the lab environment, how to start working with the Azure portal, the compliance portal, the the admin portal related with Microsoft 365. So these lab environments help us to understand better how to implement and use these Microsoft Purview features, and also um, in this case how to start using uh, these tools. For example, we saw also how to manage the compliance rules, how to manage Microsoft Purview message encryption, how to start managing sensitive information types, how to manage trainable classifiers, and one of our last activities in the lab environment were related with manage sensitivity labels. So today activities are going to be manage sensitivity labels. It's that we're going to continue with this topic of sensitivity labels, and also we're going to move to a next lab activity related with manage the trainable classifiers. With that in mind, well, we can start our lesson number 1 related with prevent data loss prevention, prevent data loss with Microsoft Purview. So, well, we're gonna discuss the data loss prevention solution and also the benefits that it's going to offer to us. So right here, we're gonna discover the solution, the benefits. Then we're gonna describe the data loss prevention configuration process. And finally, for this lesson number 1, I'm going to explain what users will experience when the solution is implemented. Okay, so let's start with this first slide, and we'll talk and remember some of the previous topics that we saw on these first 2 days. On the previous module, we saw a general overview of data loss prevention. So let's remember a little bit of this information to help protect sensitive data and reduce the risk, in this case, for that data leakage or loss of our information. In a certain way, we need a way to prevent our users from this inappropriate sharing of the information with people who shouldn't have it. So this practice, it is called data loss prevention, right? Just as a reminder of what we covered yesterday. Then, well, this data loss prevention feature is going to use machine learning algorithms and other methods to detect content that match these data loss prevention policies. So we're going to work with policy. Remember that policies we are going to relate it with. We're going to relate these policies with as a rules. What are going to be the rules that we must implement and enforce to be to make match and apply these data loss prevention rules. So let's start talking of where we are going to apply these data loss prevention policies. Well, remember that the content is going to be protected in locations like when we are using a SharePoint Online site, when we are using our email through an Exchange Online, also if we are using OneDrive accounts or even in Teams channels, we can protect our content. And well, not only in these Office features, also in our endpoints and devices. So again, this is going to be available for Windows 10 and the newest versions of the operating system, for example, Windows 11. So once that we know where we are going to protect the content, now it's time to talk about when and how to protect the content. So when and how to protect that content, it's gonna be defined by enforcing these, again, policies or rules. A policy contains one or more rules, and each rule consists of conditions and actions at a minimum. So let's think in some examples. You can show a pop-up policy tip to the user that this is gonna warn our user that they may be trying to share sensitive information in an appropriate way. So it's important for us to let them know that they are doing something that it is not proper with our data. Then another example could be block the sharing, and we can block the sharing via a policy tip. So in this case, when we enable this feature, we can also allow that the user can override the block. And well, in this case, if the user is gonna override this tip, we are going to require the user justification. So this user can explain why why the user or the employee is overriding the sharing of sensitive information, and well, it can provide a credible reason. Let's look for another couple of examples. We can block the sharing without the override option. So previously we mentioned that this user is gonna override but give a justification. But now we're gonna mention that we can prevent the override option and block completely the possibility to share this information. And well, another example, a couple of examples could be for data at rest. Remember that the data at rest is going to be data that is storage and it is not moving in emails or also moving through the internet, or when they are this information is moving between folders or storage accounts. So once that this data is stored and static in a certain way, this is considered data at rest. Well, for this data at rest, sensitive items can be locked and moved also to a secure quarantine location. And let's finish this part with another last example. For Teams chat, the sensitive information, we can establish policies, and this information is not gonna be displayed, right? So those are some examples of what can we do with this DLP policy, or in other words, data loss prevention policies. Now, it's a moment to identify the content to protect. Also, we saw this in the model number 1 as the part of Know Your Data. If you remember, there are some data in our organization that we must know first in order to discover how to protect it. For example, you can have documents with general purposes, or also you can manage documents with information related with clients, directions, complete names. Also, you can manage documents with health information, documents related with sensitive information of the organization or the company, data related with administration, for example, bank accounts, for example, credit card numbers. So it's important to know what is gonna be our data, and then we're gonna be able to define how we're gonna protect it. So for that, we have two different ways to manage our data, first of all, we have the Content Explorer. So this Content Explorer, it's gonna allow us to see and identify the email and also documents in our organization that contain sensitive information. In the other hand, the Activity Explorer, as you can see right here, the Activity Explorer includes information on activity related to content that contains sensitive information, which can also inform what should be protected with these DLP policies. So this is a small screenshot right here. Yesterday we have the possibility to visit the compliance portal. So we access to this data loss prevention section. This is an option that we found it in our left menu. Then once that we select this data loss prevention option, well, we have different settings that we can manage. For example, policies, alerts, endpoint data loss prevention settings, Activity Explorer, and also we're going to have the Content Explorer. This is just a simple screenshot, but well, once that you move to the lab environment, you're going to be able to visit this compliance portal on your own and see where are located all these features and what is the information that they provide. Also remember that, well, in the lab environment, we have some demo information. So once that you start working with documents, once that you start doing the practices in your lab environment, well, you're going to be able to see how make match with additional files, how does it generate more records during the use of your practices, right? Then, once that we understand these DLP policies and we identify the information to protect, now we can create a DLP policy. So first of all, we needed to understand it. Now we can implement it. To create a data loss prevention policy, guys, it is important to visit the compliance center. So in this compliance center, we are going to choose what we want to monitor. And this is related with, well, DLP or data loss prevention come with many predefined policy templates to help us get started or discover that we can create our custom policies. So now that we choose what we want to monitor, now we're going to choose where we want to monitor. So we can pick one or more locations that we want that this DLP policy monitor and look for sensitive information. Again, we choose already what, we choose already where. Now we're going to choose the conditions. So these conditions, these are going to be the conditions that we must be matched for a policy to be applied to an item. We can accept pre-configured conditions, or also we can define our own custom conditions. At the end, we can take this review process and view the settings. So this is all the cycle that we must follow. And well, the last part of this is choose the action to take when the policy conditions are met. In this case, the actions are going to depend on the location where the activity is happening. To summarize all this, again, choose what we want to monitor, choose where we want to monitor, choose the conditions that must be matched for a policy to be applied to an item, and choose the action to take when the policy conditions are met. Then, well, let's discover these steps one by one. For example, this is the general overview of the process, but let's take a deep dive of each of them. The DLP policy templates consist on one or more sensitive information types. So you can see right here that we can have enhanced categories, financial categories, medical and health categories, privacy categories, or our custom created categories. So this is one screenshot of the wizard that we are going to find when we are creating this DLP policy, right? This is the first step. Choose the information that we want to protect. So we can search for a specific template, or also for those ones that are going to be only available for a specific country. Then some additional parameters. For example, we need to place a proper name for our policy. Then the locations to apply the policy settings, test it, or finally set if we're gonna turn it on, and a small summarize of these data loss prevention policies. Well, as you can see here, once that we choose the information to protect, we are gonna choose the locations to apply the policy. Some of these places could be an Exchange online email, SharePoint online sites, OneDrive accounts, team chats, and channel message. Also, remember that we can extend this protection to different operating systems. For example, Windows 10, Windows 11, also Mac OS. Particularly for Mac OS, we require a specific version and above from the Catalina version and, well, higher versions. Also, we can extend, well, this protection to Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is now called Microsoft Defender for Cloud. We can extend these data loss prevention policies to on-premise repositories for hybrid environment, or finally, we can use it with Power BI or third-party apps. So that's why we have this second part of that second screenshot of that wizard that shows us how to select the locations. In this case, we already mentioned the Exchange, SharePoint Online, and so on. Well, let me take it back for a moment and let's mention we can make some exceptions right here. We can specify what we are going to include and something that we require to exclude from this location. This is also important, guys. Then remember that we can choose the condition that must be matched for a policy to be applied to an item and the action to take when the policy actions are met. So this is going to be, you can see it right here, very straightforward, guys. The conditions are going to determine what types of information are we looking for, and also once that we know what kind of information it's tried to be protected, we are going to take an action. Exceptions in this case, this is going to prevent application of a rule for content matching examples. So you saw right here what is going to be included, what is not going to be included, the actions to be taken. So when a content match condition in rule, you can apply actions to automatically protect the content and your data. Then we can establish notifications. So we can use these kind of notifications to let our employees and users know that, well, these kind of DLP policies, this is these are made to help them to how to protect the information and, well, to remain compliant without blocking their work. In this case, that's why we are showing the policy tips. And, well, in the required cases to have the possibility to override, well, they are going to override it, but they require to offer justification. So that leads us to this second point: user notifications and user overrides. So again, allows the user to override the policy and share the content. Finally, we have an incident report. So remember that almost every feature in Azure help us to provide information and have a great overview of what is happening in our organization, or in this case, particularly with our data loss prevention policies. So with the magic rule, we can send an incident report to our compliance officer, and also this report is going to provide details of this generated event. So those are some policy settings that we must define when we are creating some of them. Now, remember that in previous steps we mentioned that we can enable or enforce the policy, or we can start using this policy in test mode. So at this moment you can set in test mode or turn on, and, well, for the test mode we can use this test mode to gauge the impact before a policy application. Then the policy match. Oh, sorry, my mouse is it's playing with me. I really apologize about that, guys. Here we go. So again, the policy match will be reported in our emails through a DLP report. This test mode also allows us to activate these policy tips, and this is gonna be only for reference without enforcing protective actions. These policy tips are also is gonna be able, once that we test it, we're gonna identify false positives. For example, if we have some information that we want to share and it doesn't contain sensitive information, well, in this case, we're gonna mitigate these false positives. And finally, well, you can set exceptions to the policy, again, in the same way to reduce or avoid these false positives. Now, previously we mentioned that we can extend this protection to also Power BI applications. So Power BI, as part of Microsoft Purview, well, as part of Microsoft products, Power BI is going to support Microsoft Purview data loss prevention. And these policies are going to be helpful to detect and protect sensitive data in sensitive data sets. So, for example, some consideration important right here. A DLP policy for Power BI is going to apply to a workspace, in this case, host in a premium generation 2 of Power BI, support sensitivity labels and sensitive info types. Those are going to be the conditions that it's going to support. Then another consideration is that it could work as standalone policy, without no other locations, and for those who are still in public preview also. So those are some considerations for these data loss prevention policies for Power BI. In the other hand, well, if we extend the protection of data loss prevention for on-premise repositories, we can detect and protect sensitive data stored in on-premise repositories such as file shares, SharePoint documents libraries. Again, we need to take into account the following requirements. So the Azure Information Protection Scanner should be considered and installed. So we are gonna install, and this installation must meet all the prerequisites for Azure Information Protection. For example, the client and the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Scanner. Then there must be at least one label and one policy published in the tenant for be able to use it and extend it in our on-premise repositories. Finally, we can continue mentioning that this data loss prevention, we can extend these features with Microsoft Pureview extension. So Pureview extension is gonna allow us working with sensitive information using, for example, the Google Chrome browser. This is gonna work in a similar way that we already work with Microsoft Edge. Remember that Microsoft Edge it's a product directly from Microsoft, and it supports some of these data loss prevention features. But now, if we install an extension for the Chrome browser, well, we can use these data loss prevention functionalities. So the companies that are enabled to enroll the Chrome browser as alternative to Edge are going to be able to install this extension. How can we get this extension? First of all, well, we need to connect to a Google Chrome web store, and these users that want to install this Pureview extension, this is going to be available. So the benefits, we're going to be able to install it in single devices, not to all the devices for all our employees, just in case to be necessary. Then we can also do centralized deployment. So this deployment is gonna be also possible with using Microsoft Endpoint Manager and a configuration profile. And well, we can implement group policies for legacy deployment, in this case, for those who doesn't support these new authentication methods. Additional considerations, well, the deployment via Endpoint Manager or by group policies, this is going to prevent users from deactivating the extension. And when the Chrome browser remains on the unsupported browser list, the browser is still eligible for working with sensitive information when the Microsoft Pureview extension is and continue installed and enabled. So those are a couple of considerations if we want to install this extension to our Google web browser or Chrome-based web browser. With that, well, we're reaching the lesson number 2 of our day number 3. So this is going to be related with implementing endpoint data loss prevention. For this endpoint data loss prevention, well, we have some main objectives. In this case, our objective right here is going to be prepare our environment to enable these endpoint data loss prevention policies. Also, it's important to make the process of onboarding the devices. And once that we onboard the devices, we can use this endpoint data loss prevention. And also, we can set global configurations to these endpoint data loss prevention settings. So we're gonna discover each of these objectives in the next slides. For example, let's start preparing our environment for data loss prevention. Previously, I mentioned a lot of times this endpoint word. So what is this endpoint data loss prevention? This is gonna be a way to extend the activity monitoring and protecting capabilities of data loss prevention to sensitive items that are physically stored on Windows 10 devices, Windows 11 devices, again, some Mac OS operating systems, and additional devices. Now, we can extend the protection, but we have some limitations for this. It's important to we have some unsupported file types that can create opportunities for data loss. For example, the files that this DLP policy supports are Office files, for example, Word file, Excel file, PowerPoint file. Endpoint data policy supports PDF documents, data stored in CSV files, also TSV files, TXT files, data stored in RTF files. And well, we can continue with some codification. For example, .c files, .class files, .cpp files, .cs files, .h files, and also .java files. So those are the only supported documents for this data loss prevention, endpoint data loss prevention policies. Another important thing right here, guys, well, we can have the management of endpoint policies in the compliance portal and can be completed by a compliance admin role. So we must ensure that we have an appropriate role to accomplish this task. So we need a role of at least the compliance admin. All these devices are going to be monitored by Microsoft Defender, particularly for Defender for endpoint. So we have this main core piece to be able to monitor all these devices. And the devices on board for Defender are automatically also on board for endpoint data loss prevention, right? So not only are we going to protect our devices, also we're going to extend the protection and onboard to these endpoint DLP policies. We're going to continue talking about this preparation process. Sorry. So, well, as you can see, we continue with these simple screenshots that show us how the wizard works when we are defining and creating data loss prevention policies. So this screenshot is very similar to the previous one, but according to the settings, in this case, we are configuring this for endpoint data loss prevention. So endpoint data loss prevention only protects data on endpoints, and all the endpoint DLP policies end at the border of the device. So once that we don't have any of the onboarded devices and we are managing the information outside these devices, we can no longer monitor this the content and how they are using. What what can we do with this endpoint data, the endpoint data loss prevention policies? Well, in this case, we can detect the flows of item to cloud services or access by unallowed browsers. We can detect when a user attempts to copy information from a protected item and then paste it into another application, process, or item. Also, well, what happens if they want to use a removable media, for example, a USB device or a memory card? Also, in shared or mapped network drives, well, we are going to be able to monitor and detect when these users attempts to make these copies of information. Also, we can detect when a user attempts to print a protected item to a local network, to a local printer or a network printer. And well, in this case, also finally we can mention that we can detect when a user creates or renames an item. So maybe it's not gonna make a copy. It's gonna modify the original, thinking that they can continue with the sharing process. So this is gonna we are gonna be able to detect when a user creates or renames these documents. Now, additionally to the creation of the policies for endpoint data loss prevention, it's important to onboard the devices for endpoint DLP. So by default, the onboarding feature is turned off, and we need to turn on this feature first first of all. Then we have some of the following methods to onboard the devices. For example, we can use, let me highlight this part. We can use local scripts, group policies, the configuration manager, management, the MDM. It is mobile device management, or with Microsoft Intune, and with PDI scripts. So those are the ways that we can onboard our devices. For example, talking about the first option, we can use this local script to onboard, well, at a maximum of 10 devices at a time. This is focused for testing purposes. So remember, it's important to test first of all your policies before you enforce it. On the other hand, well, we can use a group policy. So we can use this method if we are looking to mass onboard devices for endpoint data loss prevention, and we don't plan to use a configuration manager or a mobile device management solution. On the other hand, well, we have three different options. Additionally, we can use the configuration manager if we are looking to mass onboard devices for endpoint data loss prevention, if we don't plan to use also this MDM solution or the mobile device management solution. Now, in the other hand, if we want to use these MDM solutions, or in this case Microsoft Intune, we are going to use it if we are looking to mass onboard devices for endpoint data loss prevention and we are not planning to use the configuration manager. At the end, we have these PDI scripts, so we can use this last method if we need to onboard PDI clients. The provided scripts work for more than 10 devices, so we don't have that limitation of the amount of devices that we can onboard at the moment. So previously we mentioned that, well, we're gonna configure the policies, we are gonna onboard the devices, but also we can manage global configuration for these endpoint data loss prevention policies. So these endpoint DLP settings create a framework, as you can see right here, in which endpoint DLP policies works. For example, we are gonna define a file path exclusions, so we can configure a global setting that are applied to all the endpoint settings to exclude files for a path exclusion. Also allowed us to limit where the policies are going to take effect, right? For another data loss prevention settings for endpoint, we can discover unallowed apps. So those are applied when a policy blocks unallowed apps and allowed us to limit where we can work with the protected files. For example, if I have one file that I am going to use with mobile Office 365, and then these files I move to work with another different application on my device, automatically I'm going to block the access to these unallowed apps. In the same way, well, we can establish these global settings to implement data loss prevention policies to unallowed browsers or service domains. So those are going to be applied when a policy blocks unallowed browsers, or also limit where we can share these already identified protected files. Now, previously we saw this EDM term that it is exact data match for classification. So we can use this advanced classification, scanning, and protection that we'll use in conjunction with exact data match and name entities in our DLP policies. Finally, if we are going to allow that the user override some of these policies, well, we can set global configurations and show default options and a custom text box. For example, if we are going to allow or deny for the user to give a justification. Also, we can set to only show default options and our custom text box. So if the default settings doesn't, if those are not enough for us, well, in this case, we can extend these custom settings. Now, these lessons are different from the previous model, but additionally, these are shorter, the shortest ones. So that's why we reach our lesson number 3. And with this lesson number 3, it's time to talk about configuring DLP policies for Microsoft Defender for cloud apps and also for Power Platform. Now, in this lesson number 3, we have different objectives to focus. In this case, we're going to talk about configuring data loss prevention policy and rule priorities. Then we're going to move and discover how to implement DLP policies in test mode. So remember, it is important to try with a small amount of users or with a small amount of devices, these DLP policies. In the other way, if you enforce these policies, maybe you block how the information is flowing in your organization. For example, if some users are able to manage sensitive information and you enforce this policy, maybe you're going to block that way they are performing their activities. So again, you can make these small test groups in order to try these DLP policies and validate if they are working properly. Also, well, we're going to continue talking about configuring data loss prevention policies in Power Platform, and finally, how to integrate DLP policies into Defender for Cloud Apps for an advanced functionality. So maybe you don't know what is a Power App. So this is a good way to understand a Power App. Power App, it's a suite of applications, services, and also connectors, as well as data platform that provides a rapid development environment to build custom applications for our business needs, right? So we can use Power Apps and Power Automate, all these tools for a rapid build to roll out these high value applications so that users can measure and act on the data, all this in real time. So this is related with a Power application, a small introduction, but well, with this in mind, we can create data loss prevention policies for this Power platform that can act as, in a certain way, guardrails to help prevent users from unintentionally exposing organizational data. So the Power Platform DLP policies are going to restrict communication between the use of connectors. Policies can be configured on a tenant or at the environment level. These connectors can be sorted into 3 different groups, and well, they are going to reside only in one at a time. For example, business connector, non-business connector, or blocked. It's important to mention that certain connectors cannot be sorted into the blocked group. So connectors can only communicate with other connectors in their own group, right? But well, this is more focused if you are a developer and you want to work with these data loss prevention policies. So that's why this is just a general overview on how this works and how to implement it. Then, well, we can combine these data loss prevention policies, as we previously saw. We can combine it with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So we can create file policies in Defender for Cloud Apps and use the data classification service. We can do this if we need to enable file monitoring, or if the file policies that we are going to use you want that allow to have more granular control over Microsoft Cloud Apps. Additionally, you can create data loss prevention policies in the Compliance Center and select Defender for Cloud Apps as a location. So creating DLP policies are going to help us to monitor third-party apps that we connected through Defender for Cloud Apps. For example, previously we saw that we can use Salesforce application, Jira software, Dropbox, Box application, and many others. Also, it's important to say that protective actions are limited by the API of the third-party app. So we can extend this protection, but we're going to offer a limited experience because, well, we depend of the third-party provider. Oh, sorry. My bad. Here we go. We can configure policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So the file policies can use a Defender for Cloud Apps data loss prevention engine. And this could be used, or also the same data classification services could be used as DLP policies. Then we can configure real-time alerts or review alerts via reports. File policies are configured in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps portal. And well, there is no test mode for file policies. The action will be applied as soon as the policy exists. So we can use the preview functions to see the files in our policy, and if they are gonna, they could make match if we saved it, right? So this is the way that we configure policies, but in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Now, we can manage also the DLP violations in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. For example, now let's discover what happened when a user violates a file policy. The violations of the file policy are only shown in the Defender for Cloud App dashboard and the individual policy match overview. So in this section, we can use the policy overview to review the matches of the policy and fine-tune our filters. Also, we can get a complete history of previous matches and see where our policy had an effect. And additionally, we can use the quarantine view to see what are the files that have been quarantined because of the governance actions that we implement. We can modify policies, filters, and we can have a review of the effects of our policy change have in our environment before committing to them by using the preview function. So you can see that Microsoft Defender for Cloud App, it's a very good option to extend these data loss prevention policies and how we can get information according of these events that are happening with when these are triggered and the users generate this violation of the file policies. Now we're reaching our last lesson of today. This is gonna be our lesson number 4, related with managing DLP policies and also the reports in Microsoft Purview. For that, well, in this lesson, we have several objectives. Four of them are the following. We're going to be able to review and analyze data loss prevention reports. We are going to be able to manage permissions for data loss prevention reports. Also, well, once that we review, analyze, and manage permissions in DLP, we are going to identify and mitigate the policy violations, and well, configure finally the TLP policies for policy precedents. So let's get the ball rolling in this new lesson. And well, let's start talking about managing TLP policy alerts. So, what happened when an incident occurred? What can we do with this? How can we monitor or manage these violations? Once an incident happened, well, we have this possibility to manage and monitor these violations in different sections. For example, we can choose the TLP reports. This is gonna provide an overview of all the TLP violations. So this contains data loss prevention policy matches, also show us the TLP incidents and the TLP false positives and under overrides reports. Then we can mention that we can use this TLP report section to see what is happening, and then we can choose to edit and find and make this fine tuning of our policies once that we identify the problem, so we can make changes in the configurations or also in the business processes. Remember, guys, that once that we make a change, well, it can take up to 24 hours to complete this update process. In the other hand, well, we can manage TLP policy alerts in the TLP alerts dashboard. So this is going to provide also a deeper insight into these TLP violations. For example, once that we access to this TLP alert dashboard, it's going to display us each of the alerts individually. Then you can aggregate alerts to spot patterns more easily. So that's why we have this deep insight with the alert dashboard. Finally, we can use Microsoft Defender for Cloud dashboard. So this dashboard is going to display alerts for Defender for Cloud file policies. For example, you can use this dashboard to show alerts in your Defender for Cloud TLP policies. You can drill down to specific policies and review only a single policy matches. And also, this dashboard is going to provide a match history and also the quarantine views. So at this point, let's make a small pause because we're going to remember some of the topics that we cover in the module number 1. Previously, we mentioned, and also in the demo lab environment, visit the Activity Explorer. So the Activity Explorer allows us to monitor and collect information from the Microsoft Purview portal, unified audit logs. Then it then is transformed and made available all this information with the Activity Explorer user interface. So again, we have this related screenshot. Once that we are in the compliance portal, in the left menu, we're going to select data loss prevention, and we're going to move between the different tabs that we have in this section until we get to the Activity Explorer. So this feature can also track endpoint activities, as we probably saw in the previous lessons. And we have several benefits using this. For example, the Activity Explorer provide us this historical view of what is done with protected files on our devices. Also, well, we can use it to only track endpoint DLP activities and, well, restrict allocations only to endpoint. And if we want to filter the information, well, we have different filters. For example, the date, activity, locations, the users. We can use these filters to monitor the impact for specific policies in our organization. At the end, well, once that you establish the filters, once that you look for the right information, you have an export option. So you can take this information with you and analyze it in a deeper way. So each time that you generate a new filter and or the information it's updated, again you can create a new export file of this information that it is displayed in this Activity Explorer. Another way to see the information is through the use of DLP reports. These DLP reports can be broken down by an affected service, enforced action, or applied policy. So we can use filters to restrict the displayed information to the specific policies and also time slots. For example, key features of these DLP reports are related with when the DLP policy match error report is used for identifying matches with the specific rules and fine-tuning policies. We are using this to increase the accuracy of the policies matching a company individual's data shared on a regular basis. Then the DLP incidents report can be used for identifying specific pieces of content that are problematic for our DLP policies and to identify groups of items that may require additional protective actions. Finally, the DLP false positives and user overrides report should be used to identify the accuracy of the existing DLP policies. So when we are identifying these false positives, now we are able to react faster when suddenly a large number of faulty matches may happen or occur. Again, during these 3 days of session, we discovered that we require a specific roles. So it's important to remember the information security principle of least privilege. This security principle, this assess that the users and applications should be granted access only to the data and operations they require to perform the jobs. It's important to avoid assigning them more permissions that it is necessary. That's why this is called least privilege. With that in mind, well, we need to assign the appropriate role for viewing and managing permissions in the DLP reports. For example, let's start with the first one. Let's mention that any role group with the view only DLP compliance management role is gonna be able to view these DLP reports. So this is fine to those users who are gonna only validate the information. On the other hand, well, we have a second role related with the security reader. So this security reader role, you can create a group with this role, and these users can view all the security and compliance related topics. The third role that we are going to analyze is this one related with the security reader, but now for Exchange. This group is synchronized with a security reader Azure AD role group. So this is the main difference between the security reader for Azure AD and the security reader with Exchange, but also capable to see the security data in Azure AD. We can use the Security and Compliance Center to assign permissions. Previously, we saw this in the demo environment yesterday. We visited three different portals. For example, the portal 1 that we accessed, it was related to the Azure portal. In that Azure portal, we're going to manage the roles in Azure Active Directory. Then, once that we look for a specific role, we can discover how many users are assigned to them, add users, or also are a complete group of users for the use of this particular role. In the other hand, well, we visited this Microsoft 365 portal in the adminportal.com. So we use it to assign a specific user a compliance role. And we validate the roles in the compliance portal. So we discover that we have at this moment, well, in the example, there was 7 users assigned with the global administrator role. So we validate all this information in the previous portals that we visited. So all this information, remember that we're working with the same tenant, with the same Microsoft tools. So this is gonna, we can use this security center and compliance center to assign these permissions. One last thing that we can mention right here is that, well, the Exchange role groups can sound similar to Azure AD role groups, but those work at different scopes. For example, as I previously mentioned, Azure AD role group can view all the security and compliance reader topics, but the security reader, the Exchange role, is going to be also to manage email settings and discover this DLP information for Exchange Online. Then, well, once that we discover how to see where to see the information and what is the role that my user required to be able to access to this data, well, in this case, it's time to configure the DLP for policy precedence. So it's important to say that, well, once that we set policies, we need to assign a specific priority order, and in the same way are going to be execute only the highest priority rule of the highest priority policy is going to be applied. So it's important if we have similar policies, but one of them have a higher priority, we are going to execute only that highest priority rule. The more restrictive rules or policies should be prioritized about the less restrictive rules or policies. So again, we're going to assign a priority order, and as a best practice, please always assign the most restrictive rules at the beginning of the priority order. All the processed matches are going to be logged even if the rule or even if the policy is not applied. So again, those are some considerations for policy precedents. And remember to assign the correct priority order to your rules. With that, guys, well, we're almost reaching the end of this module number 2. So finally, it's time to manage and respond to DLP policy violations. For this, we have different actors in the process. For example, DLP policies don't make decisions about the validity of the policy violations. We have two different actors or users right here. For example, the compliance officers and the compliance administrators. In this case, compliance officers have the task of monitoring reports and need to decide if the violations require technical or also it could require organizational actions. On the other hand, the compliance admin should be aware of the escalation process and contacts in other departments to communicate a unified response to all these violations. What happened when we need to exclude information or exclude policies? Well, we can use this exclusion option in our DLP policies or rules to limit the amount of false positives that we can get. And also, we can allow users to override the protective actions of specific DLP policies if we identified legitimate uses of case in previously, or talking maybe with your related users or departments that work with you. So using this information, we can validate that those movements of informations are legitimate and they made it in the same way in the past. So we can respond in a different way to the implementation of these DLP policies. With these, guys, we are reaching the end of the content. So it's time to move to the lab environment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to start sharing with you how does it work. Please, guys, give me just 1 minute to load the lab environment and show you my window. Here we go. Now you should be able to see my screen right now. And we can validate some of the topics that we cover today. Again, this is the Azure portal. We can take it from the top. Then we have the Admin Center portal. And the compliance portal. So we validate some of these functionalities, and we mentioned data connectors, data classification, compliance management. Yesterday we saw that right here we can manage user settings devices. So we can discover what are the related devices to onboard it in our tenant. Also, we can discover what are the active teams and groups that we have in our organization, and well, general settings. In the same way, well, Azure Portal, it has a lot of different features, but some of the features that we require are in Azure Active Directory. So right here, you can see users, groups, or roles and administrators. In this case, if we explore the compliance portal, we saw this option related with data classifications. Let me resize a little bit the screen because I think you are not allowed to see all the options. Remember guys that according to the size of your actual display, it's gonna adjust these two parts of the lab environment. One is gonna be for the view of your virtual machine, and the second one is gonna be related with the lab instructions. But also, well, if you think that you can resize a little bit your screen, you can move the second window, and there is a limit of this adjustable bar. And then you can go to this virtual machine in the display settings. We can look for an optimum display resolution. For example, we can increase a little bit. Well, you are gonna try some of them to see which is gonna be the best option for you. For example, I think I got one that is gonna work for us. It just only it's the bottom of our virtual machine window, but well, it doesn't matter. Here we go. Let's move to the web browser. And well, again, you have right here in the data classification section, we have different tabs. So that's why I wanted to make bigger the screen, because you may see more options. For example, in the screenshots of the slides, we saw the Activity Explorer. So this Activity Explorer, unfortunately, I don't have any record right here, but well, this is the way that it works. We can filter the activity related to the content that contains sensitive information or has labels applied. So you can specify a start date. For example, let's look if we have in the demo information, additional files, activity any, location any, user, well, we can look for a specific username, and well, in this case, we can look directly for a specific sensitivity label. Once that we've configured our filters, well, we can start looking for all the events, and again, we can export the report. You can see right here that automatically creates a CSV file, but this CSV file, it's not gonna contain anything, because again, you can see right here that we don't have any record. But well, you can see right here that according to the filters, you're gonna have these columns. You're gonna have these columns right here with the filtered information that you export from the portal, and you can keep this CSV file in order to further analysis or for audit purposes. Again, we can visit the Activity Explorer, the Content Explorer. Previously, we saw that we have some sensitive information types of files, and these are related with the full names of certain users, the use of credit card numbers, the use of, well, this is credit card numbers, this is debit card numbers, and those numbers are related with the European denomination. It shows us, well, the files, some of the files are stored in Exchange, some of these files are stored in OneDrive, some of them are in SharePoint, and previously we saw that if we want to access to some of this information, again, remember to have the proper role to see the content. So let's discover right here in the Azure portal, if we have this role. For example, we're going to select, let's take it from the top. This is the Azure portal. This left menu is going to show us a lot of information related with Azure. We are not going to work with resources. We are not going to create any virtual machine or network security features. Directly, we're going to work with users and the roles as the role assignment. Then, well, once that we are in Azure Active Directory, we have the possibility to look directly for a user or move directly to the roles and administrators. So this compliance center says that at least we must have a Content Explorer list viewer. So let's look for this specific role. Let's copy this data. Let's move to Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. Well, we don't have this Content Explorer list viewer. Okay, that's how we validate these roles. Also, you're gonna see that this is not gonna throw us any result because these kind of roles are not related exactly with Active Directory, with Azure Active Directory. But well, in this case, that's only for validation. So at the bottom, it says that these kind of permissions are gonna be completely assigned in the Office Security and Compliance Center portal. So it's important to contact our global admin user to do this. Entonces, so where I'm going to copy this. I'm going to close this one. Let's look for these roles. Compliance Manager. You can see right here a general overview. We can audit some information. We can get we can discover some solutions that may affect our score. For example, right here, this is a compliance score breakdown. So according to each solution that we use and apply, we are going to improve this overall compliance score, right? But again, what we were looking for is for the permissions. We have these Azure AD roles or Purview Solutions roles. Now we can look directly for this Content Explorer. So as you can see right here that it appears due to it's a role specific, especially designed for our compliance portal, not for our Active Directory portal. We can access to this Content Explorer list viewer, and then we can assign the roles. In this case, we don't have any member of this role. We can edit with this and choose a member. For example, we can add our global administrator. MOD administrator. You can see that this is the one that we are using in our demo tenant. If you want to validate this, well, you can. Let me resize for a moment our window. In the resources tab, in the second part of our window, we have the name of the tenant, the name of our global user. Remember that this lab environment offers us the global administrator user to implement and do all the required activities without any problem of permissions. Then, well, it automatically generates a default password. So you don't need to edit this password automatically. You can paste it if you're required to access with this user. And this is the tenant's name. So let's validate the tenant name with right here with the email address of our user. It resides my the size of my window, but it is not problem. In this case, you can see right here the username admin at wwlx, then a serial number 236335.microsoft.com. You can see that it is the same user, so you don't have any problem. We're using the main user that we use to sign into the Azure portal, and well, we are in the same Edge session, so automatically it's gonna take all this user for all the tabs related for Microsoft portals. Now I'm gonna select this user, I'm gonna add this user, and once that I don't want to continue doing any other change or adding additional members, I'm gonna click right here in done. So it's important to validate that, well, we just made a change right here in our portal. We're gonna save the changes. Let me resize again that window. Just bear with me, guys, please. Display settings. Here we go. We're gonna keep the changes, and we are going to go back to the portal. So in this case, we're not gonna edit the role group. We just add a user, and well, in this case, we need to refresh in order to validate. So let's let access again. And now it will automatically update the member list, and it shows that my global administrator or my MOD administrator user already has this data classification list viewer. So let's close this window. And again, we access through permissions, role groups for Microsoft Preview solutions. In the other hand, we are going to be able to see the Azure AD roles. But well, in this case, we can't do anything with these roles according to the activities that we want to make in this compliance portal. Permissions again, Microsoft Preview solution roles. Let's go back to the top. And let's move to data classifications. We visited previously this Content Explorer. And now, again, you can see that we have some matches that the Content Explorer explore certain email accounts or docs, documents in our organization, and some of them make match and discover that it contains sensitive information or also labels that have been applied. So this is the sensitive information type, and this is the location. We're gonna look for some of them. Also, we can use these filters to look for a specific category. For example, IT related. We have some documents in SharePoint that are related with IT content. We can open this IT. Okay. Well, I don't know why it's not validating my user. Maybe internally need to update the assignment of this role to my global administrator user. But in theory, we should be able to access to this part due to we assign this uh, this Content Explorer viewer role, right? Well, again, remember that this is a lab environment, so maybe it's gonna take a while to apply some changes. And well, when you make your own practices, you can try all these features and look how does it work for all of you. So in my particular case, this is just for reference for you guys. So let's continue explore this compliance center. We can take from the top right here. Again, always it's gonna provide a general overview. So we can continue looking for, in this case, for alerts. Again, due to I don't have any activities related with my tenant, I didn't make any changes with my documents. All these are demo information. Well, that's why I don't have any alerts. But during the perform of your activities, you are gonna generate some certain alerts. You are going to be able to investigate. You are going to be able to filter by date, so you can see that automatically it's taking a complete month. And well, you can add additional filters. Once that you end with the filters, that provided information is going to be displayed right here. So it's going to provide the severity of this alert, the name of the alert, the status, the related tag, the category, and the activity account. Also, when was the last occurrence of this kind of activity? So it's gonna provide a lot of information, and in the same way, once that you filter the information, you're going to be able to export this file. You can open this file and see the content. So the content right here is related with the same columns that we saw in the filter section. In the same way, we can download these files for audit purposes or for internal investigation purposes. These files, don't forget that these are gonna be .csv files. So this is a good way to manage a large amount of information with these CSV files. So I don't going to save any change. That was only for reference. Again, the report section. this is gonna provide us how the levels, how the labels are applied in our organization, how the labels are classified as records, the most used labels in our organization, for example, and in the same way we can filter this information right here. Again, it's gonna take a little time to process all the information, but we don't have any related data right here in SharePoint, OneDrive, or also in Exchange. So there is no problem right here. Also, it's gonna show us documents with retention labels. Remember that these retention labels are gonna be used for keep information stored until a certain period of time occur. Once that is a period of time finish, you have two choices. In this case, you can validate the information in order to keep it, or finally you can delete it permanently. So this is related with the data life cycle. Now, some of the retention policies, you can see that we can create our own retention labels. In the case for the medical records, the retention policy is gonna last 7 years. So for personal financial information, well, this information is gonna be retained for 3 years. And in the same way, the maximum period that we can use, at least right here, it's for 10 years. In case to be required to be stored for additional time, well, for large period of times we require a specific license to store the information and apply a retention policy with a long period for a long period of time. But in this case, well, this is just for reference. You can see right here, the retention duration is gonna be 10 years. What happened when this time finish? Well, it is not gonna remember the user to validate the data. Automatically, it's gonna delete it, and well, it's gonna finish this retention process. So right here we have the retention policies. So for the employee records, well, we can establish some status. This is gonna be enabled, this policy is enabled. This is gonna be applied for email, for SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, and for Microsoft 365 groups. It doesn't have a preservation lock, so we can manage this employee information without any problem. For example, if we manage US financial data policy, again, this retention policy, it's applied to content if it contains sensitive financial data for the US government. This policy is enabled, and it doesn't have a preservation lock. So you can, for example, you can edit this kind of policies. In this case, we're not able to modify the name, but we can edit the description, or remember that we have some default policies, so we can copy some of these policies and create our own policies, and in that way we can manage completely the name, and well, the description, it doesn't matter, it's just for reference. but this is a good topic to cover right now. Let me make a small pause and share with you that for good practice reason, it's important to all the change that you made during your practices, please add your comments. Previously, I was giving a SC300 course, and during the delivery of this course, I needed to share my tenant with an additional user from my organization. So this user and me agreed to use the same tenant, but we needed to specify which change we're going to do each one. And when we made a change in our tenant, well, we were defining this comment during the activities. For example, I needed to create a tenant, he needed to create a user, maybe he needed to assign an application to create a app registration. So each time that we made any change in our tenant, in this case we were working with the Azure portal in Active Directory, we placed a specific comment. For example, right here, you could see that clearly describe this policy to users. So, for example, we can add, my complete name is Andres Ibarra Holguin. So I'm gonna place my initials, A, like all in one. Oh, okay. Also remember, guys, if you are gonna work with a different keyboard, right here, you can change your keyboard preferences. In my case, well, as I live in Latin America, I need to select the Spanish keyboard. Now, it's gonna recognize my characters. So I'm going to place Andres Ibarra Holguin. I'm gonna place maybe the reason SC 400 course. This change was made for demo purposes. So you can see right here that I am defining why I am making this change, who is making this change, and also, well, you can establish your own path. For example, I can also add the date. Today it's 19. Well, in this case, American format. The month, the 10th. Today is 19, October 19. And the year, you can place 2022 or the shorter version that is 22. So once that you made a change and you add your description, well, in this case, I'm gonna hit right here on next. Now you can choose the type of the retention policy that you are going to create. Also, well, we cover some content we cover on during the slides, but it's important to read it because it's going to provide additional information or some key words to understand better how does it work. For example, right here it says that this policy can be an adaptive one or a static one. So the advantage of an adaptive policy will automatically update where it's applied based on attributes or properties that we will define. In the other hand, guys, well, we have these static ones. So this static policy is going to be applied to content in a fixed set of locations and must be manually updated if those locations change. Right here, well, it is a predefined policy. That's why I can't edit it just for reference, but well, you can choose between adaptive to one or static one. Then, as the previous screenshots that we saw on the slides, we are gonna choose a location to apply the policy. By default, we have, well, Exchange Online, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Microsoft 365 groups. Also, well, in this case, manage Skype for Business. In this case, it allows me to add an additional place and also for Exchange public folders. Remember that we can include or exclude. We can make some exceptions. So for example, let's see right here for SharePoint sites. Well, at the moment, I need to validate the name of the SharePoint sites that we have in our demo environment. But well, we can include these sites, or also if we select all sites, we can exclude some of the some sites that should be excluded for this policy application. Now I'm gonna hit right here in next. Oh, you can see that, well, at least we must either choose at least one user for Skype for Business or turn that location off. In this case, we're gonna turn off these options. All these were just for reference. And well, in this case, we're gonna decide if we want to retain and validate the content, or well, automatically we're gonna delete the content. For this particular policy, well, it's gonna retain the policy for 7 years. It's gonna start this retention period based on when the item were created, and also at the end of this period, well, it's gonna automatically delete the item. Also, well, we have a couple of additional options. We can establish if we are gonna retain the items forever, if we are gonna only delete items when they reach a certain age, or again, we have our first option related with retain items for a specific period. This is a summary of this retention policy. In this case, you can see that we are setting this for 7 years. Well, it is created for 7 years, and it's going to apply for Exchange, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365 groups. We can hit right here on submit. It's gonna take a little while, but in this case, we're gonna cancel the process. Yes, we're gonna cancel. In the same way, you can explore your different retention policies, or if you want, you can select and edit it, delete one, disable the policy, export the policy, or inactive mailbox. For example, if you want to create a new retention policy from the scratch, you only should hit right here. So we can say, for example, human resource resume data. These were created by me for the SE 400 course. Retention data. Retention policy for the resumes. In this case, well, again, we can add the date. Now we're gonna leave it on static, for example. So we're gonna choose only the locations that we want to apply. These kind of documents, it shouldn't be in SharePoint sites. Maybe they arrive to the office by email, or also human resource department is stored some of them to keep it in OneDrive accounts. So now we're going to include all the recipients, and we're not going to exclude anything. Right here, I'm gonna hit on next. What happened with this information? Well, we can retain the items for a specific period. For example, maybe it's gonna take a few time for a user to be hired by this company or by another. So maybe if we require to keep this information for a certain period of time, we can select the minimum for this kind of information. Well, when we receive this kind of information, or also when the item were created, we can start this retention policy. In other hand, well, we can also set this option. We can start the retention period based on the last modification of this document. At the end, we are gonna delete the item or just have a kind of reminder of that the period of this kind of information end, and if we want to validate the items. In this case, we wanna select delete the item automatically. We're gonna hit on next. This is a small summary of our policy, and we're gonna hit right here and submit. Again, as I previously mentioned, this is gonna take a little time to apply. In this case, it created my policy very quickly. And well, once that it finished, this wizard, we can hit right here on done. And here is the retention policy that we create. You can see that it was created by me. It says the date and the last edition. With that, guys, I think we are getting we're reaching the end of today's session. So I'm gonna save my lab environment. Don't forget that each time that you finish your activities on the demo lab environment, please save your labs. Also, don't forget that you can, let me open my camera to say hello. Hello, everyone. Well, it's me and my cat. Oh, my cat. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, everyone. Don't forget to save your labs. Also, if you run out of the time with your labs, always it's gonna ask you to extend the period of time to keep working with your labs. So don't worry with this situation. You can still working with your practices. So by now, it's time for me to say bye-bye to the camera. And well, and we are going to continue in the second part of today's session. So we're going to take this 30 minutes to have a short coffee break or a short lunch break. So please, guys, feel free to post your comments and questions in the second part of on the session. And well, see you soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.